Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we're going to discuss important issues appearing in the Hindu newspaper dated 25th May 2018. Let's begin. The news appears on page number 8 in the editorial section. The news reads The Russian Ride. PM Modi's meeting with Russian President signals a necessary recalibration. This editorial examines the reset and rebalancing of ties between Russia and India during the recent informal meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin in Sochi in Russia. So the question is, why was a reset in ties between India and Russia necessary? The special understanding between India and Russia had deteriorated over the past, with India drifting closer to the United States and Russia drifting closer to China. The reset in ties, therefore, is a necessary recalibration in ties between India and Russia. So, in this respect, let us also understand about the outcomes of the visit between the Indian Prime Minister and Russian President Vladimir Putin. India has assured Russia that India's purchase of military hardware and investment in energy sector would not be hampered by a new US law, that is countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, which targets such companies which indulges in specific commercial relationship with Russia, especially in defense. In this meet, India also wanted assurance from Russia that its recent military exercises, helicopter sales to Pakistan, as well as its outreach to Afghan Taliban will not hamper India's national security interest. And both India and Russia wanted to stabilize their common understanding on global issues due to instability in US foreign policy. According to the author, such informal summits like the one in Sochi between India and Russia becomes useful to break the ice and reset foreign relations. And such informal summit also helps in reset of foreign relations whenever required based on national concerns. However, the author also suggested that such a shift in foreign policy must be accompanied by greater transparency, as it helps both the countries in taking their foreign relations forward. Thus, in this news, we saw how the informal meeting between Indian Prime Minister and Russian President helped in reset and rebalancing of ties between India and Russia. Now, this reset had also become crucial because India of late had started to drift towards USA, whereas Russia had started to drift towards China. As far as outcomes of the visit is concerned, India assured Russia that India's purchase of military hardware as well as investment in energy sector would not be hampered by this new US law, that is countering America's adversaries through Sanction Act. And this particular law target companies that indulge in specific commercial relationship in defense, specifically with Russia. And in this respect, India also wanted assurance from Russia that its recent military exercises, helicopter sales to Pakistan, and outreach to Afghan Taliban shall not hamper India's national security interest. Also, both countries wanted to stabilize their common understanding on global issues due to instability in US foreign policy, specifically under Donald Trump. And according to the author, such informal summits becomes useful to break ice as well as it helps in reset of such foreign relations based on national concerns. However, the author also suggested that such a shift in foreign policy must be accompanied by greater transparency. So this news on reset of foreign relations with Russia becomes important with respect to your GS paper 2. As you can see under GS paper 2, it gets covered under bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. Thus this editorial Russian right becomes very important to read specifically from a mains point of view. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 9. The news reads Remembering Azad. His legacy is an antidote to majoritarian chauvinism. Now, a question has already been asked in the year 2013 in GS paper 1. And the question read Discuss the contributions of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad to pre and post independent India. So, in this news, let us go through some of his contributions and what was his position during the national freedom movement. Now, Maulana Azad was the youngest and the longest serving president of the Congress during the nationalist movement. In 1912, he started the weekly newspaper named Al Hilal and also became a part of the independence movement. He brought out Al Balagh after Al Hilal was banned. So, in this we got to know about two important facts, that this newspaper or weekly newspaper Al Hilal was started by Maulana Azad, and he also started Al Balag once Al Hilal was banned. So these two informations becomes very important from your prelims point of view. Then Maulana Azad joined Congress in the year 1920. He became the president of Congress in 1923 at the Delhi session, and further he also remained president from the year 1939 to 1945. He also opposed separate electorates and attributed it to the British policy of divide and rule. He led the Congress delegation to the failed Shimla Conference of 1945, which was convened to break the impasse between the Congress and the Muslim League. Despite Congress' acceptance of partition, he maintained his opposition to partition even after 1947. 10 years after the independence, he wrote the book India Wins Freedom, in which he also specifically opposed partition. So Maulana Azad was never in favor of partition of India into Pakistan as well as India. After independence, Maulana Azad was India's first education minister, and he remained so for 11 years. And he was the first to raise the issue of national system of education in the country, which today is the bedrock of national policy on education. This national policy of education updated in the year 1986 as well as in the year 1992. The entire concept of national system of education lies in the fact that up to a given level, all students, irrespective of their caste, creed, location, or sex, should have access to education of a comparable quality. And it is because of this effort since beginning, now right to education has also become one of the part of fundamental right under Article 21A, where it is mandatory for the state to provide free and compulsory education to children belonging to the age group of 6 to 14 years of age. And Maulana Abul Kalam Azad's birthday, that is on 11 November, is also celebrated as National Education Day. Thus, we see some of the important aspects with respect to Maulana Azad. I'm sure after going through these points, you'll be able to answer this particular question with respect to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. So let us revise very quickly about Maulana Azad. He was the youngest and the longest serving president of Congress during the national movement. In 1912, he started the weekly newspaper Al Hilal, which was then banned, and after that he started Al Balag. He joined Congress in the year 1920 and became the president of the Congress in 1923 at the Delhi session. And from 1939 to 1945, he remained president. He opposed the concept of separate electorates and attributed this to the British policy of divide and rule. He led Congress delegation to the failed Simla Conference in the year 1945. He has written the book India Wins Freedom, and he was independent India's first education minister. He was the first person to raise the issue of national system of education in India, which today is the bedrock of national policy of education, came in the year 1986, again updated in the year 1992. And 11th November, which is Maulana Azad's birthday, is celebrated as National Education Day. And this topic pertains to GS paper 1 of your UPSC syllabus. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 9. The news reads, "For better protection of human rights, giving teeth to National Human Rights Commission." Now in this news, the Union Cabinet, chaired by the Prime Minister, has given its approval to the Protection of Human Rights Amendment Bill 2018. Now this bill aims for better protection and promotion of human rights in the country. And this Protection of Human Rights Amendment Bill 2018 shall be made in the original act, that is Protection to Human Rights Act 1993. So it is under Protection to Human Rights Act 1993 that a National Human Rights Commission as well as a State Human Rights Commission has been established. In this respect, let us go through the salient features of this Amendment Bill of 2018. The salient features are: it proposes to include National Commission for Protection of Child Rights as deemed member of the Commission. It proposes to add a woman member in the composition of the Commission. Here Commission refers to NHRC. It proposes to enlarge the scope of eligibility and scope of selection of chairperson, National Human Rights Commission as well as State Human Rights Commission. And it proposes to incorporate a mechanism to look after the cases of human rights violation in the Union territories. And it proposes to amend the term of office of chairperson and members of National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commission to make it in consonance with the term of chairperson and members of other commissions. So these are some of the important salient features of this particular Protection of Human Rights Amendment Bill 2018. All these salient features will strengthen human rights institutions in India and also for the effective discharge of their mandates, roles, and responsibilities. And this particular amendment of 2018 will make both National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commission more compliant with the Paris Principle with respect to their autonomy, independence, pluralistics, and wide ranging functions in order to effectively protect and promote human rights. So, in this news, we saw about the salient features of Protection of Human Rights Amendment Bill 2018, which aims for providing a better protection and promotion of human rights in India. And National Human Rights Commission as well as State Human Rights Commission has been established under Protection to Human Rights Act 1993. And this amendment will make both NHRC and HSRC more compliant with Paris Principle with respect to autonomy, independence, and pluralistics and wide-ranging functions, so that in order to effectively protect and promote human rights. So this Paris Principle basically talks about with respect to protection and promotion of human rights. And in this respect, we also saw the salient features where it says it proposes to include National Commission for Protection of Child Rights as deemed member of the commissions. The other deemed member of NHRC includes Chairperson of National Commission for Minorities, the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, and National Commission for Women shall be deemed to be members of Commission for the discharge of functions as per Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. So in this particular deemed members, it says that it proposes to include National Commission for Protection of Child Rights as deemed member of the Commission apart from the other deemed members. It then says it proposes to add a woman member in the composition of the Commission. It further says it proposes to enlarge the scope of eligibility and scope of selection of chairperson, National Human Rights Commission as well as State Human Rights Commission. It proposes to incorporate a mechanism to look after cases of human rights violation in the Union territories, and it proposes to amend the term of office and members of National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commission to make it in consonance with the terms of the chairperson and members of other commissions. Under GS paper 2, it gets specifically covered under statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies. With this, let's move on to the next news. Now we come to page number 13. The news reads, Windfall oil tax on ONGC in offing to soften fuel prices. Oil producers would have to part with any revenue they earn from prices crossing $70 per barrel, and states may be asked to cut VAT or value added tax. So looking at the rising oil prices, the central government is planning to levy a windfall tax. So first of all, let us understand about this windfall tax and then we'll see what this particular news talks about. Now windfall tax is a tax which is levied by government against certain industries when economic conditions allow those industries to experience above average profit. Thus, windfall taxes are primarily levied on companies in the targeted industry that have benefited the most from economic windfall. Thus, windfall taxes are primarily levied on companies in any particular industry which have benefited from an economic windfall. In this case, oil producers are benefiting from rising international oil prices by earning higher revenues. So it is due to the higher revenues earned by oil producing companies in India, the government had decided to levy windfall tax on such oil producing companies. So under the scheme, oil producers who get paid at international rates for the oil they have produced from domestic fields would have to part with higher revenue or any revenue they earn once oil prices crosses $70 per barrel mark, and the revenue so collected by the government would be used to pay fuel retailers. Now the question is, why is the government adopting this step to levy windfall tax? The government is considering this step to levy windfall tax as a permanent solution to deal with the problem of spike in oil prices. Also, because the finance ministry does not want to reduce excise duty as it has to ensure that adequate tax funds are available for social welfare schemes. As of now, the centre levies Rs 19.48 as excise duty on a litre of petrol, whereas it levies Rs 15.33 on a litre of diesel. So in this news, we saw that due to rising oil prices in the international market, the central government is planning to levy a windfall tax. And a windfall tax is levied on companies belonging to a particular industry who are reaping certain economic benefit. So in this case, it is the oil producing companies who are benefiting from rising oil prices in the international market by earning higher revenues. So the central government intends to levy a windfall tax on such oil producing companies in India. If windfall tax is levied on oil producing companies, then these companies have to part with higher revenue once oil prices in the international market crosses $70 per barrel mark. And in such a case, revenue collected will be used to pay fuel retailers. Other issue which we saw was why is the government adopting this particular step? This step is being considered as a permanent solution to deal with rising oil prices. Also because the finance ministry does not want to reduce excise duty as it has to ensure that there is adequate tax funds available at the disposal of the government which can be used for social welfare schemes. And as of now, the excise duty charged on petrol and diesel is rupees 19.48 and 15.33 respectively. The issue of windfall tax comes under economy section of GS paper 3. So a question on windfall tax may be asked either in the prelims examination or in the mains examination, or the benefits of windfall tax levied on certain sections of the industry, its advantages as well as its disadvantages can be asked in mains examination. Also, it becomes important to know considering the rise of price of oil both in the international market as well as in the Indian market. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 18. The news reads, global warming may have devastating effects on rice. In this news, as per a report published in the journal Science Advances says that with an increase in concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere due to global warming, rice will lose some of its protein and vitamin content. And this will put millions of people who consume rice at the risk of malnutrition. As you can see, this topic of global warming covers under GS paper 3 of your syllabus under biodiversity and environment, and specifically under conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, environmental impact assessment. Also with respect to major cropping patterns, specifically with respect to issues and related concerns. A question has also been asked in the year 2017 in GS paper 3, that is very recently. The question was, climate change is a global problem. How India will be affected by climate change? How Himalayan and coastal states of India will be affected by such climate change? This news on rice losing some of its protein and vitamin content due to concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is one of the impact of such global warming. So let us also see what are the other risk factors with respect to this increase in concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. It says increase in CO2 will affect rice consuming nations adversely because in these countries 70% of calories and most of the nutrients come from rice. So most of the people residing in Southeast Asia where rice is consumed on a large basis will get severely impacted if proteins and vitamin contents in the rice get diminished. It further says the countries that are most vulnerable are those that consume the most rice and have lowest GDP, particularly in Southeast Asia, like Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. So it relates consumption of rice with less GDP of a country. Thus, people residing in such area will be severely impacted by high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. It further says that researchers found that iron, zinc, protein, and vitamins, namely vitamin B1, B2, B5, and B9, which help the body convert food into energy, were all reduced in the rice grown under higher CO2 conditions. Now, this is an alarming situation because it says that due to higher concentration of CO2 will lead to lessening of proteins and vitamins which are required to convert food into energy. So, if this conversion of food into energy does not take place, then it will severely affect the health of any citizen or health of any person. And the vitamins mentioned here are B1, B2, B5 and B9 and iron, zinc and protein. So this lessening of proteins and vitamins which is required to convert food into energy becomes a serious issue with respect to impact of health of people consuming such rice. Then it says protein and vitamin deficiencies can lead to growth stunting, birth defects, diarrhea, infections, and even early death. So here we saw about certain health impact, and in this loss of protein and vitamin deficiency, it further talks about growth stunting. We know that stunting is one of the major reasons for early mortality in children because they do not get sufficient amount of vitamins and proteins through their food consumption. So in this case, so if they consume rice having less quantity of protein and vitamin, then it will severely impact their stunting growth, birth defects, diarrhea, infections, which could further lead to their early death. So we see all these risk factors with respect to global warming impacting in different ways. And in this particular case, because of high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, rice grown will lose some of its protein and vitamin content, which will have severe health issues, which will put millions of people, including children, at the risk of malnutrition and other diseases, which can even lead to their death. So, this topic on global warming becomes very important with respect to your UPSC syllabus. And questions can be asked both in prelims as well as mains with respect to global warming as well as its different impacts. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 7. The news reads Clean Air India Initiative launched. Campaign plans to rope in Indian startups and Dutch companies to combat air pollution. Now, in this news, the Prime Minister of Netherlands has launched the Clean Air India Initiative. Now, let us understand the purpose of this campaign. The Clean Air India Initiative aims to curb air pollution in Indian cities by promoting partnerships between Indian startups and Dutch companies. The purpose is also to build a network of entrepreneurs who are working on business solutions for cleaner air. This will also encourage and channelize entrepreneurs in the right direction to find solutions to global problems pertaining to environmental pollution. Such initiatives for a better environment also advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDG goals. Another focus of this Clean Air India initiative was that of stubble burning, and specifically with respect to Delhi because of Delhi's deteriorating environment caused by stubble burning in adjoining states of Haryana and Punjab. And it is in this respect that Indus Impact Project is working with an aim to halt hazardous burning of paddy. And this is being done by using the residual paddy straw as feedstock to make materials which can be used in the construction and packaging industry. In this respect, let us also understand the other possible solutions for crop residue burning. This crop residue or stubble of paddy can be used for other purposes, specifically in the paper industry, fiber industry, etc. Harvesting machines can be used to convert this crop residue, which can be further sold to thermal plants to produce electricity. Harvesting machines can also be used to cut crop residue and mix it into the soil. This will also improve soil fertility. Crop residue can also be utilized as feedstock for ethanol production. So in this news, we saw that the Prime Minister of Netherlands initiated the Clean Air India initiative, and the purpose is to curb air pollution in Indian cities by promoting partnerships between Indian startups and Dutch companies. This will help in building network of entrepreneurs who are working on business solutions for cleaner air, and in a way this will also encourage entrepreneurs to find possible solutions to the global problems of environmental pollution. And in a way, this initiative will further advance the United Nations SDG goals, that is, Sustainable Development Goals. This Clean Air India initiative also focused on Delhi's degrading environment due to the problem of stubble burning in adjoining areas of Haryana and Punjab. In this respect, Indus Impact Project is working with an aim to halt hazardous burning of paddy by using these residual paddy straw as feedstock to make materials to be used in construction as well as packaging industries. We also saw other possible solutions for crop residue burning, in which we saw that these crop residue can be utilized to make paper or fiber. Harvesting machines can be used to convert this crop residue, and they can be further sold to thermal plants to produce electricity. We also saw that mixing crop residue in the soil improves soil fertility, and crop residue as feedstock can also be used for ethanol production. This forms a part of GS paper 3 under the section Conservation, Environmental Pollution and Degradation and Environmental Impact Assessment. Hence, we see this becomes a very important topic with respect to your UPSC examination. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news also appears on page number 7. The news reads, Government schools to get grants for buying sports equipment. Scheme to make school education an integrated whole. Now in this particular news, central government will give grants to school for buying sports equipment to promote the culture of sports in schools. And as per the government, this grant is an integral part of Samagra Shiksha scheme. And this news pertains to your GS paper 2 section under issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education and human resources, and also government policies. Thus, it becomes important to understand about this Samagra Shiksha scheme. So let us understand Samagra Shiksha scheme is all about. The Ministry of Human Resource and Development has launched this Samagra Shiksha scheme to improve the quality of education, to enhance learning outcomes, and using technology to empower children and teachers. Thus, Samagra Shiksha scheme. Thus, the aim of Samagra Shiksha scheme is to improve quality education, to enhance learning outcomes, and use of technology to empower both children and teachers, and effectively unifying learning from preschool level to that of class 12. Thus, Samagra Shiksha is not just a new name but an entirely new thought process or an overarching program to boost quality education in India with the inclusion of digital technology as well as introducing skill development at school level. Thus, we see the Samagra Shiksha scheme does not only aim to improve quality of education but also tries to improve the quality of teachers by strengthening teacher education, and it also introduces the concept of skill development at school level. Thus, in a way, it promotes vocationalization of education. Thus, we see the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan aims to treat education holistically as a continuum from preschool to class 12. Thus, effectively, it will equip all children with different skills and knowledge essential for their overall development. Thus, this news on Samagra Shiksha scheme becomes very important as it deals with not only the knowledge of a child but also providing them with skill development and also to improve quality of education, enhance their learning outcomes, and also use of technology to empower both children and teachers. And as we have seen, this topic forms a part of your GS paper 2, specifically under issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education and human resources, and under government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. So question in prelims can be asked on this Samagra Shiksha scheme. Hence, this topic becomes equally important both from mains as well as prelims point of view. With this, we come to an end to today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.